When Armin moved into Maplewood Community, he felt like his life was finally taking a peaceful turn. He had worked for years to buy that small but beautiful house at the end of the street. It was painted cream with green shutters, and a tall oak tree stood in front of it. He loved the calm mornings, the soft sound of birds, and the smell of fresh air that came through his window. Everything seemed perfect. Armin was a quiet man who preferred spending his evenings fixing things around the house or sitting on the porch with a cup of tea. He didn't bother anyone. He believed in living peacefully and letting others do the same. But peace did not last long in Maplewood. There was a woman named Karen who lived 2 houses away. She was the head of the local HOA, the Homeowners Association. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her. She always walked around with a small notebook looking for violations in people's yards. If someone's grass was too long or the garbage bin was left out for a few hours, she would send a warning notice the same day. Karen liked control. She liked when people listened to her rules, and she didn't like Armin from the start. Maybe it was because he was new and didn't join the HOA meetings. Maybe because he didn't try to impress her like others did. Whatever the reason, she decided that Armin was a problem. It all started one sunny morning when Armin was planting flowers near his fence. He had just bought bright marigolds and roses. He was humming a tune when Karen stopped her car near his driveway. She rolled down the window and called out in her sharp voice, "Excuse me, are you aware that those flowers are not allowed here?" she said. Armin looked up, surprised. "I am sorry." "What do you mean? They are just flowers." Karen stepped out of her car, holding her notebook like it was a weapon. "The HOA rulebook clearly says only neutral-colored plants are allowed in the front yard. Those bright orange and red flowers are not neutral." Armin blinked. "Neutral-colored plants? I don't think I've heard that rule before." Karen gave a tight smile. "It was added last month. Maybe you should attend the meetings if you want to stay informed." Armin stayed calm. "I'll look into it," he said politely. "For now, I'll finish planting these. They make the place feel alive." Karen frowned. "I'll have to issue a notice," she said and walked away. By evening, Armin found a letter taped to his door. It was an HOA warning notice saying he had violated community guidelines. He laughed softly, not realizing that this was only the beginning of a much bigger problem. Over the next few weeks, Karen's attitude became worse. She began finding small reasons to bother Armin. Once, she said his garbage bin was placed 6 inches too close to the sidewalk. Another time, she complained that his mailbox paint was slightly faded. Every time, she left a new warning letter. Armin tried to be patient. He thought maybe she would stop after a while. But she didn't. She started sending official HOA fines. First it was $50, then $100, then $200. One afternoon, Armin saw her taking pictures of his house from the street. He walked out calmly and asked, "Karen, is there any problem?" She crossed her arms. "I'm documenting violations," she said. "You've been ignoring my notices. I've already reported you to the HOA board." Armin sighed. "I've paid my HOA dues on time. My house is clean and maintained. What violations are you talking about?" Karen smirked. "You'll see when you get the letter." True enough, 2 days later a thick envelope arrived in his mailbox. Inside was a list of supposed violations and a warning that if he did not comply within 10 days, legal action would be taken by the HOA. Armin couldn't believe it. It felt ridiculous. He hadn't done anything wrong. His yard was neat, his house freshly painted, and he had followed every major rule he knew. Still, Karen seemed determined to make his life miserable. He decided to attend the next HOA meeting. The meeting was held in the community hall. When he entered, a few neighbors greeted him kindly, but many looked nervous. Karen stood at the front, talking loudly about standards and rules. When the time came for members to speak, Armin stood up. "I would like to understand why I am being fined so often," he said in a calm but clear voice. "I have received 4 warnings and 3 fines for things that don't make sense." Karen gave a cold smile. "You've repeatedly broken community appearance rules. We can't make exceptions just because you're new." Armin looked around. Have any of my neighbors received fines for having flowers or faded mailboxes? People shifted in their chairs, silent. A few looked down. One man finally said softly, "No, not that I know of." Karen quickly interrupted, "That's not relevant. Every case is individual." Armin nodded slowly. "So this is personal then?" Her face tightened. "You're out of line." The meeting grew tense, but Armin didn't argue. He simply gathered all the letters and notices he had received and left quietly. That night he decided he had enough. He went through the HOA rulebook carefully. To his surprise, half the things Karen had accused him of breaking were not even mentioned in the rulebook. The neutral-colored plant rule was nowhere in it. The mailbox paint rule didn't exist. She had made them up. Armand spent the next few days collecting evidence. He took pictures of other houses with bright flowers, faded mailboxes, and even small decorative items that were supposedly not allowed. He spoke to a few neighbors who were also tired of Karen's behavior but were too scared to speak out. They gave him their support quietly. Finally, one evening, Armin received another letter. This one said, "Final notice. You are hereby ordered to vacate your property for repeated violations." It was signed by Karen and the HOA secretary. For a moment, Armin just stared at the letter in disbelief. "Evict me? From my own house?" he said under his breath. It felt unreal. He had bought the house legally. He had all documents. There was no way she could do this, but Karen seemed confident. She had even written that the HOA had filed a complaint in local court to remove him from the community. Armin's calm eyes hardened. He decided it was time to stand up not just for himself, but for every neighbor she had bullied. He called his friend Amir, who worked as a lawyer. After reading the letters, Amir said, "She can't evict you. HOA has no power like that unless it's related to unpaid dues or serious damage. What she's doing is harassment." That night, Armin and Amir began preparing all the documents and evidence. Every photo, every letter, every fake rule, everything went into a neat folder. As Armin looked at the folder, he said quietly, "If she wants a fight in court, then she'll get one. But this time, she'll learn she can't misuse her power." Outside, the street looked peaceful again. But inside Armin's house, a quiet determination had replaced frustration. He was ready to face Karen and the HOA in front of the judge. A week after Armin received that strange eviction notice, he got an official envelope from the city court. Inside was a paper with bold letters that said, "Hearing notice." His heart raced for a second, but then he took a deep breath. He was not scared anymore. He had done nothing wrong. It was time to show the truth. Amir, his lawyer friend, met him that evening. They sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, pictures, and copies of HOA rules. Amir flipped through the pages carefully and said, "She's trying to make it look official, but her case has no base. These so-called violations are just her imagination." Armin nodded. "She thinks no one will question her." "Maybe people are scared of her," Amir smiled. "Then we'll show her that she picked the wrong person this time." Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful again. But news about the case had started to spread quietly among neighbors. Some whispered in small groups. Others peeked from their windows when Karen passed by. She walked around proudly as if she had already won. She told people that Armin had broken too many rules and that the HOA had no choice but to remove him. One afternoon, Armin went out to check his mail. A few of his neighbors were nearby watering their lawns. One of them, an elderly man named Mr. Rafiq, came over slowly. "Armin, I heard about your case," he said in a low voice. "Karen has gone too far this time. She even fined me once for having wind chimes. I paid just to avoid trouble. But you're doing the right thing." Armin smiled gently. "Thank you, Mr. Rafiq. I'm not fighting to be rude. I just want fairness. If there are rules, they should apply to everyone equally." Mr. Rafiq nodded. "We all hope the judge sees the truth." A few days later, the court date arrived. Armin dressed neatly in a light blue shirt and black trousers. Amir carried the folder of evidence. The courthouse was small but tidy, with tall wooden doors and a calm atmosphere. Inside the courtroom, the air felt tense. Karen was already there, sitting proudly with her own lawyer. She wore a formal dress and held a thick folder as if she had the entire law in her hands. When Armin and Amir entered, Karen gave a fake smile. I see you decided to come, she said loudly. Armand just nodded politely. Of course. I respect the law. Karen's lawyer, a tall man with glasses, leaned over and whispered something to her. She smirked confidently. She truly believed she would win. The judge entered and everyone stood up. He was an older man with calm eyes and a steady voice. Please be seated, he said. We are here to discuss the complaint filed by the Maplewood Homeowners Association against Mr. Arman. Karen's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, he began. Our client, the HOA president, is here today because Mr. Arman has repeatedly violated community standards. Despite several warnings, he has refused to comply. The HOA has decided that his property no longer meets the community's expectations. The judge looked at him carefully. And what violations are we talking about? Karen's lawyer started reading a list. Unauthorized flowers, improper mailbox paint, trash bin placement, and general disregard for HOA regulations. The judge raised an eyebrow. Unauthorized flowers? Karen quickly stood up and added, Your Honor, we have clear guidelines about yard appearance. Bright colors disturb the uniform look of the neighborhood. Amir spoke next, keeping his tone calm. Your Honor, we would like to show the HOA's own rulebook. None of these so-called violations appear in it. My client followed every official guideline. What the HOA president is claiming is personal preference, not law. He placed the printed rulebook on the judge's desk and opened the pages where the relevant sections were clearly marked. The judge took a few moments to read. Then he looked at Karen. Mrs. Karen, I don't see anything about flower colors or mailbox shades here. Can you show me where it's written? Karen hesitated. It was discussed in a meeting, she said. It's a common understanding among residents. Amir replied, A discussion is not a legal rule, Your Honor. Rules must be documented, voted upon, and recorded. The judge nodded slowly. That's correct, Karen's face tightened. She looked around nervously for her lawyer to say something, but he stayed quiet for a moment, then tried to change the topic. Regardless, Your Honor, Mr. Arman has shown disrespect to the HOA's authority. Arman spoke for the first time. With respect, Your Honor, I have always been polite and paid my dues on time. I simply refuse to accept false rules. I believe in fairness. I'm not against the HOA, only against misuse of power. His calm voice filled the room. Even the clerk looked impressed. Amir then opened the folder of evidence. We have photos of other houses in the same neighborhood with similar flowers, faded mailboxes, and bins near the sidewalk. None of them received any warning or fine. Only my client did. He placed the photos in front of the judge. The judge examined them carefully. Interesting, he said. So these same conditions exist elsewhere, but only one homeowner is being fined? Yes, Your Honor, Amir confirmed. Karen interrupted quickly. Those are different cases. We handle each property individually. The judge looked at her with a calm but sharp expression. Or perhaps you handle them selectively. Karen's face turned red. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Amir continued. We also have written statements from several neighbors who have faced unfair treatment but were too afraid to speak. One even paid a fine for having simple decorations. The judge leaned back in his chair. This is becoming concerning. HOA boards are meant to serve communities, not control them. Karen's lawyer tried to argue again, but the judge raised his hand. Enough for now. I will review all the documents and evidence. The hearing ended for the day, and the next session was scheduled for the following week. As everyone walked out of the courtroom, Karen looked frustrated. She turned to Arman and said coldly, You think this is over? You've just made things worse for yourself. Arman met her eyes calmly. No, I think I've made things fair. Amir smiled at him as they left. You handled that perfectly. The judge already seems to see through her game. That evening, Arman returned home feeling lighter. The sky was turning orange as the sun went down. A few neighbors waved at him from across the street. Some even came by to offer support quietly. One woman said, We've been scared of her for years. Thank you for standing up. Maybe this will change things for all of us, Arman smiled. We just need fairness. That's all. Inside his house, he looked at the oak tree outside his window. It stood strong, tall, and steady, just like he wanted to be. He knew the next hearing would be important. He would need to stay patient and strong, but for the first time he felt hope. Far away, Karen sat in her living room surrounded by her files. She was angry and restless. She couldn't believe that her authority was being questioned. She called one of the HOA members and said, We need to find more proof against him. The judge can't just dismiss my complaint. But the member on the other end sounded unsure. Karen, maybe we should drop this. It's getting serious, Karen snapped. No, he will not embarrass me in court. I'll show him what happens when you cross me. While she plotted her next move, Armin was already preparing calmly with Amir for the next hearing. He had no plan for revenge, only the truth. The real battle had just begun, and soon, the judge's priceless reaction would surprise everyone in Maplewood. The week between the first and second court hearing passed slowly, but it was full of quiet activity. Armin spent every evening with Amir, organizing their papers and reviewing what had happened so far. The more they read through the documents, the more strange details they found. Many of the HOA letters Karen had sent were not signed by other board members. Some had no official stamps. Others were written in her handwriting alone. Amir pointed to one of the letters and said, "This one claims to be from the HOA committee, but look here. Only her name appears. There's no approval or signature from any treasurer or secretary." Armin frowned. "So she's sending these letters herself, pretending it's official?" Amir nodded. "That's what it looks like. We can bring this up in court. It proves misuse of authority." Meanwhile, in the Maplewood neighborhood, people had started to talk openly. Many residents were tired of Karen's constant complaints and surprise visits. One neighbor, Mrs. Sarah, had received a fine because her garden fence was 1 inch taller than allowed. Another, a young man named Bilal, had been warned for parking his car slightly away from his driveway. They were all small issues, but the fines kept coming. One evening, Mrs. Sarah came to Armin's house carrying a folder. "I heard about your case," she said softly. "I think you should have this. It's a copy of last year's HOA meeting notes. Look at what's missing." Armin opened the folder. The pages showed official records of HOA meetings, but some dates had no details. There were blank spaces where new rules were supposed to be written. Mrs. Sarah explained. Karen said she would update the records later, but she never did. "I think she made up her own rules after those meetings." Armin thanked her. This could help a lot. It shows she didn't follow procedure. Later that night, he and Amir reviewed everything again. The evidence was becoming strong. They had proof that Karen's letters were unofficial, her rules were fake, and she had used HOA authority for her personal control. Amir smiled. "If the judge sees this, the case will turn completely in our favor." The day of the next hearing arrived. The courtroom was more crowded this time. Several Maplewood residents had come to watch quietly from the back. They were curious to see what would happen. Some whispered among themselves, saying, "Maybe now someone will finally stop her." Karen entered the room wearing a confident smile, but her eyes darted nervously around when she noticed so many neighbors present. She sat beside her lawyer and crossed her arms. The judge entered and everyone stood up. When the session began, he said, "We will continue the hearing for the case between the Maplewood Homeowners Association and Mr. Armin. Mr. Amir, please continue your presentation." Amir stood, holding the new evidence. "Your Honor, since the last hearing, we have reviewed the letters sent by the HOA. We have discovered something important. Most of these letters were not authorized by the HOA board. They were signed only by Mrs. Karen, without any other official approval." He placed the letters in front of the judge. "As you can see, there are no supporting signatures from the treasurer or the secretary. We also have statements from HOA members confirming they never voted on these new rules." The judge leaned forward, reading through the pages carefully. "Mrs. Karen, can you explain why your name is the only one appearing on these letters?" Karen straightened her posture. "I am the HOA president. I have the authority to handle these matters." The judge shook his head slightly. "Not without the consent of the board. HOA presidents cannot create or enforce new rules without a proper vote." Karen's lawyer tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, these were emergency decisions made for the good of the community." Amir spoke firmly. "An emergency does not justify false documentation or invented rules. We also have meeting records that show no mention of these decisions. The community members were never informed or asked to vote." He handed the meeting records to the judge, showing the blank spaces and missing details. The judge frowned as he flipped through the pages. "This is concerning. These records are incomplete and inconsistent. It suggests someone has been changing or hiding official documents." Karen's face grew pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but the judge raised his hand. "I am not finished. I will also note that several neighbors are present today. Are there any who wish to testify? A soft murmur filled the courtroom. Mr. Rafiq slowly stood up. Your Honor, I have lived in Maplewood for 10 years. We have all received unfair fines from Mrs. Karen. Many of us paid just to avoid arguments. She fines people for the smallest things, and when we ask about the rules, she says, I decide what's best for the neighborhood. The judge nodded. Thank you, sir. Does anyone else wish to add something? Mrs. Sarah raised her hand. I do, Your Honor. Last year she told me to repaint my fence because the color was too dark. I looked through the rule book afterward, and there was no rule about fence color. She made it up. The judge turned to Karen. Mrs. Karen, what do you say about these statements? Karen looked uneasy. They're exaggerating, Your Honor. I was only trying to keep the neighborhood looking good. The judge's voice remained calm. There is a difference between maintaining standards and abusing authority. You cannot impose personal preferences as legal rules. Karen's lawyer whispered something quickly, but it was clear the mood in the room had changed. The neighbors were no longer afraid. They had seen the truth and were speaking out one by one. Amir then added one final piece of evidence. Your Honor, we also found that the HOA funds were used for personal expenses. These receipts show that community money was spent on things unrelated to HOA work, including luxury items and private events. Gasps filled the courtroom. Karen's lawyer's face turned red. That has nothing to do with this case, he said quickly. The judge replied, It has everything to do with it if the same person misused authority for both power and money. He looked straight at Karen. Mrs. Karen, these are serious accusations. You are expected to serve your community honestly. Karen looked shaken. I didn't do anything wrong intentionally, she said softly. I just wanted order. Armin spoke for the first time that day. Order comes from fairness, not control. I never wanted a fight. I only wanted to live peacefully in my own house. The courtroom fell silent. The judge looked at him thoughtfully and then said, Mr. Armin, I appreciate your patience and the way you handled this matter. It is rare to see someone fight injustice calmly. He turned to both sides. I will review all documents again and make my final decision in the next hearing. When the hearing ended, people followed Armin outside. Many of them thanked him quietly. You stood up for all of us, Mrs. Sarah said with a smile. No one had the courage before. Armin smiled back. We all deserve to live in peace. I just did what was right. Later that evening, Karen sat alone in her living room. Her lawyer had left early and her phone was silent. For the first time, she felt nervous. She knew the judge had seen enough to doubt her. Still, she refused to accept defeat. She looked at the piles of papers on her table and whispered, I'll fix this. I'll prove I'm right. But deep down, she knew she was losing control. The neighbors she once scared were no longer silent. The truth had begun to spread, and her authority was breaking apart. Meanwhile, Armin and Amir sat on the porch watching the calm night sky. Amir said, You did well today. The truth is out. Next time the judge will decide. Armin nodded. I just want this to end. Not for revenge, but so no one else has to go through this again. The wind moved gently through the oak tree in front of his house. For the first time in months, the air felt peaceful again. But both men knew the final hearing would decide everything. And that was where the judge's reaction would change the story completely. The day of the final hearing arrived with a sense of tension that could be felt all through the Maplewood neighborhood. The sun was bright, but the air felt heavy. Many neighbors gathered quietly outside the courthouse, waiting to see what would happen. Everyone knew this was not just about one man's house anymore. It was about truth, fairness, and the power that had gone unchecked for too long. Armand woke early that morning. He stood by his window, looking at the oak tree outside. Its leaves moved softly in the wind, almost like they were wishing him strength. He turned and looked around his neat home. Every part of it held his effort and care. This is my home, he said softly to himself, and no one will take it away unfairly. Amir arrived a few minutes later carrying a briefcase filled with the final set of documents. Are you ready? He asked with a confident smile. Armand nodded. Yes, I just want this to end the right way. They drove to the courthouse together. On the way, Armand felt calm. He had done everything right. He had stayed respectful and honest. Whatever the judge decided, he knew he had nothing to hide. When they entered the courtroom, it was already full. Many neighbors were sitting in the benches, whispering quietly. Even a few reporters from the local newspaper had come. Karen was seated on the other side, looking tired but still trying to appear confident. Her lawyer sat beside her, flipping through papers nervously. The judge entered and everyone stood up. His face was calm, but his eyes showed that he had already reviewed everything carefully. "Please be seated," he said. The courtroom fell silent. The judge began. "We are here today for the final hearing between the Maplewood Homeowners Association and Mr. Armin. I have gone through all evidence, letters and testimonies presented in the previous sessions. Before I announce my decision, I will allow both sides to make a closing statement." Karen's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, my client only wanted to maintain the beauty and discipline of her community. She worked hard to keep the neighborhood clean and organized. Any misunderstandings should not be seen as wrongdoing. We ask the court to recognize her dedication." Karen nodded, keeping her expression calm, but her hands were trembling slightly on the table. Then Amir stood up. His voice was firm but respectful. "Your Honor, my client has always respected the HOA rules. He paid his dues, maintained his property, and lived peacefully. Yet he was repeatedly fined and harassed based on rules that do not exist. Mrs. Karen acted beyond her authority and used HOA power for her personal control. We have shown letters written without approval, meeting records with missing details, and statements from residents who faced the same unfair treatment. This case is not about flowers or mailboxes. It is about abuse of power and the right of a homeowner to live without fear." He paused and looked around the courtroom. "My client did not fight back with anger. He trusted the law. And today we trust that the truth will win." The judge nodded slowly. He looked down at his notes for a moment, then lifted his head and began to speak. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, it is clear that several of the HOA's actions under Mrs. Karen's leadership were improper. The rules used against Mr. Armin were never approved or recorded officially. Multiple letters were signed by the president alone, without board authorization. Furthermore, there is evidence of selective enforcement and financial misuse. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she stayed silent. The judge continued. "An HOA exists to protect fairness and community harmony, not to control residents or misuse power. What happened here is a clear violation of that purpose." He paused and then said firmly, "Therefore, I rule in favor of Mr. Armin. The eviction order is dismissed completely. All fines charged against him are canceled. Additionally, the court orders a full audit of the Maplewood HOA accounts and an internal election for a new board within 30 days. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Karen's face turned pale. She looked stunned, as if the ground had slipped beneath her. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he said, "Mrs. Karen, as the current HOA president, you are temporarily suspended from your position until the investigation is complete. Any misuse of funds or false documentation discovered during the audit will be handled under the law." The room stayed silent for a moment, then whispers spread like ripples in water. Neighbors exchanged looks of relief and satisfaction. Armand sat still for a second, almost not believing it was over. Then Amir placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled. "You did it. The truth won." Karen stood up suddenly. "Your Honor, this is unfair. I was only doing my duty. I kept this neighborhood clean." The judge looked at her calmly. "A true leader earns respect through fairness, not fear. This case is closed." With that, he stood and left the courtroom. Karen's lawyer gathered his papers quickly, avoiding her eyes. She sat back down slowly, her proud expression gone. For the first time, she looked small and uncertain. Outside the courtroom, the neighbors gathered around Armin. Some clapped his shoulder. Others thanked him openly. Mr. Rafiq said, "You stood up for all of us. We can finally live in peace again." Mrs. Sarah smiled kindly. "You didn't just win a case. You gave our neighborhood its voice back." Armand smiled modestly. "It wasn't just me. Everyone who spoke the truth helped." Reporters came forward asking a few questions. Armand only said one thing to them. "Rules are good when they are fair, but when rules are used as weapons, someone must stand up." Later that evening, Armin returned home. The street looked peaceful again. Children were playing near the corner and the air felt light. He stood on his porch, breathing in the fresh evening wind. Amir joined him with 2 cups of tea. "You handled it well, my friend," Amir said with a grin. "You kept your calm, and that made all the difference." Armand took the cup and smiled. "I never wanted revenge. I just wanted peace." Across the street, Karen was packing some papers into her car. She avoided looking at anyone. Her power was gone, and the neighbors she once scared were now ignoring her. For the first time, she understood that control without respect meant nothing. The next week, Maplewood held a community meeting. This time it was different. The hall was full of smiling faces, people who finally felt free to speak. They voted for a new HOA board, and Armand was offered a position. He politely refused, saying, "I'm happy just being a good neighbor." The new president, a calm man named Malik, said, "We'll make sure rules are fair for everyone. No one will be treated unfairly again." Everyone clapped. It felt like a new beginning for the whole neighborhood. As the meeting ended, Mr. Rafiq came to Armand and said, "You know, your story will be told for a long time." The man who stood against injustice without anger. Armand laughed softly. "I just did what anyone should do when something is wrong." That night, as he sat under the oak tree, he thought about everything that had happened. The long days, the stress, the hearings, all of it had been worth it. His house was safe, and peace had returned to Maplewood. He closed his eyes and listened to the quiet night. For the first time in months, he felt complete calm. Inside her house, Karen sat alone with her thoughts. The silence around her felt heavy. She realized how her pride had blinded her. For years, she had tried to control others, believing she was protecting the neighborhood, but in truth, she had only isolated herself. She looked out of her window and saw neighbors talking happily on the street. Something she hadn't seen in a long time, maybe. She thought it was time to change. The court's decision had not only given Armand justice, it had reminded the entire community of what true leadership and fairness meant. The story of the HOA battle would soon become a lesson for everyone in Maplewood. A story about courage, truth, and the priceless reaction of a judge who saw through false power. The morning of the final court hearing arrived. Armand stood outside the courthouse, his heart calm but firm. He had waited for this day for months, and he was ready to finish what Karen had started. The sun was bright above the courthouse steps, and a cool wind passed through the tall trees near the entrance. Armand wore his best shirt, holding his folder of papers tightly in one hand. Inside that folder was everything he needed to show the truth. When Armand entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy. Karen sat with her lawyer, wearing a confident smile. She believed she would win, just as she had convinced everyone in the neighborhood that she would. But this time things were different. Armand had facts, proof, and most importantly, the support of the community that had once doubted him. The judge, an older man with kind but sharp eyes, looked around the room. He called for silence and started the session. "We are here to conclude the case between Mr. Armand and the Homeowners Association, represented by Ms. Karen," he said firmly. Karen's lawyer began speaking first. He talked about the so-called rules, the missing forms, and the small changes Armand had made to his garden. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes, using every possible reason to make Armand look guilty of breaking HOA regulations. Karen nodded proudly beside him. When it was Armand's turn, he stood up slowly. He looked at the judge, then at Karen, and spoke in a calm voice. "Your Honor, I respect the rules of the HOA. But what happened to me was not about rules. It was about control and personal dislike. I have followed every requirement, paid all my dues, and kept my property clean. Yet Ms. Karen tried to evict me for reasons that had no truth behind them." He walked to the table where the judge sat and handed over his papers. "Here are the original documents showing the house ownership, the HOA guidelines, and the maintenance reports. You can see that everything is in order." The judge looked through the papers carefully. Armand continued, "I also have statements from my neighbors who witnessed Ms. Karen's behavior, including threats and false notices she sent without approval from other HOA members." Karen's confident smile began to fade. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked, "Ms. Karen, is it true that you sent eviction warnings without the HOA board's consent?" Karen tried to answer, but her voice trembled slightly. "I was acting in the best interest of the community," she said. The judge frowned. "Acting in the best interest of the community does not mean breaking the law or using power to harm others. You were supposed to protect fairness, not destroy it." The courtroom fell silent. Armand stood still, watching Karen's face turn pale. The judge continued to ask questions, one after another, and each answer from Karen only made her case weaker. Soon her lawyer stopped speaking altogether. After nearly an hour, the judge leaned back and took a deep breath. "I have reviewed all evidence. It is clear that Mr. Armand did not violate any HOA rules. The eviction attempt was unlawful and based on personal reasons. Therefore, I dismiss all charges against Mr. Armin. Additionally, the HOA must pay for his legal expenses. A quiet wave of relief spread through the room. Armin closed his eyes for a moment, thanking fate for standing by truth. The judge wasn't done yet. He turned to Karen and said, "Ms. Karen, your position as HOA president is hereby terminated. You have used your authority unfairly. The HOA will conduct new elections." Karen's jaw dropped. Her voice broke as she tried to protest, but the judge raised his hand. "Enough, Ms. Karen. Justice has been served." When the session ended, Armin walked outside the courthouse. Several neighbors who had come to watch the trial approached him with warm smiles. "We're sorry for believing the lies," one of them said. "You never deserved that treatment." Armin smiled politely. "Thank you. What matters now is that we build a better neighborhood, not one filled with fear." As he reached his car, his phone rang. It was Mr. Lewis, one of the kind neighbors who had always supported him. "Congratulations, Armin. The whole neighborhood is talking about what happened. Everyone is happy that Karen's control is over." Armin chuckled softly. "It was never about revenge, Lewis. I just wanted fairness." Back in the neighborhood, news spread fast. Karen packed her belongings and left her house quietly within a week. A new HOA election was held, and this time the members chose Mr. Lewis as the new president. He was fair, friendly, and respected by everyone. Under his leadership, things began to change. The neighborhood became peaceful again. People smiled at each other when they passed by. Small gatherings started at the park every weekend. The fear and tension that had filled the air were finally gone. One evening, Armin stood in his garden watering his plants. The sunset painted the sky in orange and pink. He felt the peace he had been missing for so long. His house, once a symbol of stress, now felt like home again. He looked around and saw children playing on the street, laughter echoing across the yards. Mr. Lewis walked over with a cup of tea in his hand. "You did something amazing, Armin," he said. "You stood up against unfair power and you didn't give up." Armin smiled. "Sometimes standing for what's right is not easy. But when you stay calm and believe in truth, justice finds its way." They both stood quietly for a while watching the sunset. The sound of birds filled the air. It felt like a new beginning for the whole neighborhood. Days turned into weeks and peace continued. Armin joined the new HOA committee, not for power but to make sure fairness stayed alive. He made sure everyone's voice was heard. The community began to trust again and unity replaced fear. Later, when someone asked him how he managed to stay strong through everything, Armin simply said, "I just believe that right will always win, even when it takes time." And that became his quiet message to everyone around him. The story of his fight against unfairness became an inspiration. People learned that no one should ever be afraid to speak the truth. The judge's priceless reaction that day was not just about law, it was about humanity. It reminded everyone that real justice is more than rules on paper. It is about doing what is right, even when no one is watching. That evening, as lights turned on across the quiet street, Armin smiled once more. He had lost his peace once because of pride and lies, but now he had found something better: respect, truth, and a peaceful life in the home that was truly his. And in that peaceful neighborhood, the sound of laughter and kindness replaced the sound of control and fear. The lesson stayed clear for everyone. No matter how powerful someone may seem, truth always has the final word.